profit before they pay taxes, then you begin to have a problem if you do not have rules that govern this. Because it allows those subsidiaries, those African subsidiaries of these companies to strip out their profits. And before they then declare their profits, they then pay a vast reduced tax. And so they can end up paying as a corporate company in Kenya, in Uganda, in South Africa, they can pay an effective tax rate of 3% after they've made all those deductions. But they must compete with the same company that sells cars or clothes or makes things that is based in Kenya or Uganda or Liberia, who pays 30% tax. And so that local business starts at a huge disadvantage. And so part of this whole discussion must be about how do we change the way we tax the economy, because the world of economics have changed. I think that is the one part that I would like to share.
Thank you, and good morning everyone. Just to follow on from Mr. Wort's intervention here, I think really looking at the digital economy and looking at the space that we're in now in the digital era, I think it sort of emphasizes how we need to ensure that the strength of our tax infrastructure within African countries is solid and sound. A lot of the issues that my colleague here mentioned are pertinent to ensuring that African countries can capture their fair share of tax revenues that are generated through the digital economy. But then we have to ask ourselves, do we have the capabilities? And so looking more at tax administrations and saying, okay, can the digitalization of tax administration really enable us to be able to better capture the tax revenues that accrue within the digital economy, as well as other income streams that we fail to really capitalize on currently. At the moment, Africa earns, I'd say about 15% of tax ratios to GDP. And we find that although digital trade is growing in Africa, it's been estimated to be about 40% and growing on an annual basis, there's still a failure for African countries to truly try and find exactly how we can better improve the tax capture across several different sectors, and how we can actually optimize the digital economy, technology, to ensure that we can shore up our domestic revenue mobilization. I think going forward, we will need to be thinking about how we can develop a digitalization strategy on a national level. The African Union has taken this topic some way. Earlier this year, they looked at a digital transformation agenda, which they're working earnestly to try and sort of promote throughout the region. And I think this is something that as we move through this conference, we're trying to see, okay, what are the critical areas that can actually be used as pillars of the digital strategy for African countries to refer to, and to actually identify where the key leakages are occurring. I'd also like to say that from the UN perspective, this conference is very relevant, and it's come at an opportune time. The United Nations Interagency Task Force for Financing for Development is preparing their 2020 Financing for Development report. The key theme there is disruptive technologies. And so they'll be looking at how disruptive technologies has hindered or progressed countries' abilities to better improve their domestic resource mobilization capabilities. And so as we go through this conference, I think it's really about trying to find solutions, trying to find options that are responsive to the needs of African countries, and see how we can take this forward in the years to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I just want to re-emphasize, I think 4 points, and building up from the brilliant submissions from both Logan and Uzumma on this. And the first point is that the rules we have now on taxation are not fit for purpose. They are outdated rules when you look at how the economies globally and even in Africa are operating. The most dominant economies or the most dominant companies today are not companies that are brick and mortar. They are digital companies. one of the largest companies, as you might know, Amazon, the world, a $1 trillion company, operates largely virtually. So as the world changes, in the context of Africa, how are our rules, particularly when it comes to tax, how have they been designed or reformed to be able to capture revenues from the increasingly digitalized economy? I think that's one point that would be important to re-emphasize. The second is that digitalization, as much as it's bringing a lot of benefits, has its victims. And you know the fights we have had in many different countries on Uber, how it is basically crowding out your formal registered taxi companies and coming in with, of course, more competitive operators such as Uber and Taxify and others. And this is disrupting creating an uneven playing field. The same applies to Airbnb. You talk to hoteliers that are suffering huge losses because they are those that have apartments or operating cottages in Mombasa for the Kenyans in the room and others. And all these companies are operating outside the tax net and creating an playing fair, an uneven field because they are not paying taxes, and as opposed to companies that are operating that are paying taxes. So that, I think, is the second point that would be really important to emphasize. The third point is that you can't tax an increasingly digitalized economy using non-digitalized operations. So how are our revenue authorities, they themselves, digitalizing their operations to be able to capture revenues from the digital economy? And this is going to be a central piece of a central pillar of the conversations we're going to have. We are seeing a number of revenue authorities across the continent trying to introduce different digital platforms to be able to capture operations or transactions from business that is happening online, virtual operations. So the digitization of revenue institutions and government operations in general is an important piece. Of course, this will be balanced vis-a-vis the data issues of privacy, and for those in Kenya, of course, you know the whole conversation we've been having about the Uzumma number, and all these, I think, are interrelated issues that we will be unpacking at this conference. And the last point that I would like to emphasize before I hand over to Madam Jane is that by the virtue of their structure, digital platforms are more prone, and I think that's the point that Logan made very clear, that because of the way they are structured, digital platforms are more prone to tax evasion and tax avoidance. So this whole conversation we're having about how the continent is bleeding, how much revenues we are losing as a result of tax evasion and tax avoidance, this problem is going to become even more bigger when we focus on an increasingly digitalized economy. And here we see a problem that maybe the reason why our governments are not coming up with the requisite legislation, because they really don't know how much they are losing, and they need to invest in doing those calculations, doing those mathematics about how much are we actually losing as a result of our ability to tax the increasing digitalized economy. And maybe once we have those numbers, the government might be able to invest more and see this as an increasingly serious problem. So those are my few submissions. I will hand over to Angela.
Thank you so much. I will just add on to what my colleagues have pointed out. First of all, I want to point out the urgency of the matter, that it's urgent for our governments, for Africa, to come up with a strategy to address these issues. Because as Africa, like Alvin has pointed out, Africa is bleeding. There is lots of money going out. You know? Tax evasion, tax avoidance has been with us, but it has become even now worse because of the digitalization of our economy, and also because of our lack of capacity as African trade administrators to be able to handle this issue. So it's an issue of emergency, issues of utmost emergency that we develop as Africa a clear way forward on how to address this issue. In terms of building our capacity as tax administration, but also us as Africans to understand these issues, but also in terms of putting in place a legal framework to be able to address this issue. Another issue which I want to talk about is that legal framework, the rules of that game. The rules of that digital economy, the rules of that game of e-commerce are being negotiated in the trade arena, not in the tax arena, because tax governance is talked about in the OECD, in Paris, but now the tax rule, the e-commerce rules are being negotiated in the World Trade Organization. And you find it's the developed countries which have developed their platforms, which have expertise in the technology. They are the people who are setting the rules. For example, just one example, there is an issue around local presence. African countries are saying, let those businesses like Uber have a local presence. They are saying, no, we can be able to direct from wherever we are. You know, so our governments, the African Union has to come up and also chart a way forward and negotiate rules and also put in place at various national level rules which can allow us to tax this new e-trade. So for me, that's my submission to you, that our governments need as urgently as possible to come up with a legal framework, to be able to come up with a plan of action on how to build skills, how to achieve, to get this technology also, because most of the technology we are using is from outside. It also makes it difficult for our government to be able to tax it.